McHenry, Illinois, entered the 20th century as a rich, growing farming community. But with that growth also came change. New businesses, new job opportunities, and new ways to socialize and to be entertained. Although not everyone agreed on how people should spend their free time. As the nation moved forward with a ban on the sale of alcohol, McHenry found itself having to make many choices as it entered the Prohibition Era.
In the 1920s, it was a big time of change in McHenry. As more and more people are sliding away from agriculture. According to the 1920 census, there's 2,800 farms in McHenry County, and by the 1930s, it's down to 2,600. How much that has to do with the start of the Depression or not is unknown, but a lot of it also is just a shifting social dynamic. The village of McHenry, according to the 1920 census, there's 9,000 people, and by the 1930 census, there's down to 8,500. The interesting thing is the surrounding area in McHenry, like McHenry Township, there's an increase of about 500 people. So people are kind of sliding into different areas.
My name is Craig Fonkook. I am an ex-American history teacher, high school American history teacher. In the early 1920s, there was all kinds of money available to many families. So this meant that so many Chicagoans could come out to McHenry. Many people found that McHenry was a great tourist destination.
There's a couple vaudeville theaters here in McHenry. There's one at the corner of 120 and Green Street, which is now Jaxill's. And also what the old theater was, there was also a vaudeville theater. Gambling's also very big. Boating is really popular as well. And of course, alcohol.
There was a big movement of reformists, the Progressive Era, in the early 1900s. And the reformers wanted to do all kinds of good things to make America a much better place. Along these lines, reformers decided that one of the things they needed to do was to cut down on alcohol consumption. By doing this, two things would happen. One, men would become nicer, more decent. And two, we would have less crime because there would be less wildness because of people getting drunk on alcohol. And actually, there's a third reason. By cutting down on alcohol consumption, we would also allow more grain to be available to feed Europeans after World War I, because it was thought that there was going to be mass starvation after World War I, and the United States was going to have to feed the world.
In December of 1920, Prohibition is enacted, making the consumption and sale of alcoholic beverages illegal. And that has an effect in McHenry as well. According to McHenry County in the 20th century from the McHenry Historical Society, there were three main reasons that Prohibition really wasn't welcomed with open arms here in McHenry. The first one was there was a big Irish and German population in McHenry County. And that's true as McHenry as well, because they had the German church, which is now St. Mary's, and St. Pat's Church, which is the Irish church. So they both had big German and Irish populations, and alcohol was a big part of like their heritage and their traditions. The second reason was there was a lot of soldiers coming back from World War I, and a lot of these guys were young, and they were going over to Europe and having their first drinks, and they're going to come back here and not be able to do that, and that really upset a lot of people. But the third reason, probably the biggest, is the economic end of it. Is McHenry was a big resort town at that time. Alcohol was a big part of sales for it. There's a lot of money being made there. And so if you're telling a lot of these taverns and hotels that you can't sell alcohol, it's just not going to go over well because you're taking money out of their pocket.
With the tourism, the bars were happy to supply all the beer all of these people wanted. But the prohibitionists said, no, we can't have all of this beer. We can have soda, we can have root beer, we can have near beer, but by golly, we've got to save their decency. We had a sheriff of McHenry County named Lester Edinger, who was a World War I hero. And he didn't want to enforce prohibition laws because he had friends who were drinkers. In fact, even the state's attorney in McHenry County, who was supposed to enforce the laws here, was a beer drinker, as were his assistants. And so these people said, what is this all about? We don't need this kind of thing. And so local law enforcement was very lax because their friends were the ones who ran the hotels, who ran the resorts. They weren't going to bother their business, so it was very lax, except when the pressure of the people called dries said, oh my God, we've got to stop all of this alcohol usage in McHenry. People called dries were those who were the temperance people, who believed that we should not be selling alcohol. There was a guy named Alfred Paus. And Alfred Paus went off to college after he came back from the United States Army Air Corps. And he was a hero in World War I, Al Paus. And he was an attorney in McHenry who was favored by the Dries to go up against, in 1923, the current, at that time, state's attorney in McHenry County. And Paus won with the help of the Dries. And when Paus was in power, if you will, as the McHenry County State's Attorney, he made a deal to get Nicholas Stylen to be elected as postmaster of McHenry. Well, that was fine. Paus would eventually get in so much trouble. There was a massive indictment of prohibition violators in McHenry itself. Paus was framed by two guys in McHenry County into being a prohibition violator himself. Why I mention Nicholas Stylen? The very man that Paus had appointed as McHenry postmaster, he confessed that Al Paus of McHenry, the state's attorney, was a prohibition violator. Al Paus ran away and disappeared in November of 1924. The day that he was supposed to be in the courthouse in Woodstock concerning all these violators, he disappears. Oh, for months, everybody wondered where Al Paus went. Well, Al Paus was hiding out in Vineland, New Jersey as an egg farmer. Eventually, Paus would come back to McHenry in 1952. Can I have my law license back? No, they said, you're a bad guy who ran away. So Paus got a job sweeping the floor of his brother-in-law's saloon in Crystal Lake. When he dies, he and his wife are buried in the Woodlawn Cemetery in McHenry. But he was a big, very, very important person in McHenry County Prohibition history.
Juson's Hotel, which is on the corner of Riverside and 120, also had a saloon underneath, which is where the Foxhole Tap is today.
We're in a place called the Foxhole, which is in the Riverside Hotel, which is on the corner of today's Highway 120 and Riverside Drive. One of the nice things in my research that I did in McHenry County Prohibition was to go and look at a variety of different places to see if they had any original stuff. Of course, in the Foxhole, there is the original wood bar. At least the top of the wood bar is there, which is one of the very few places where actual wooden bars from the Prohibition era still exist. So if you stand at the bar and take a scone of beer, you're back in the 20s yourself. This area and this building where we are were essential to the movement of peoples through McHenry County on their way up to, let's say, Lake Geneva. Not only is that important, the railroads, when they came to McHenry through McHenry, they brought all kinds of people to the area.
I'm Jessica Schneider. I am owner of Yo Corner Tap, co-owner with my husband. We are sitting in the oldest building on Main Street. Been here since 1858. So this area of town became this area because of the railroad tracks. So you're getting a lot of the blue-collar workers coming off of work, coming here and spending their time here before going home. You could also see a lot of the farming culture here. When this place first opened as a bar in 1858, there were no sidewalks, there was no refrigeration, there was no street lights, there was no paved roads. During Prohibition, the only thing that we can kind of speculate that we did was that soup club. So you had to pay to come in here, and that's how you're able to enjoy it. We do have some family stories that say that our back office area Used to be a gambling parlor. There's some marks on the floor where you can see the outline of what could have been some carpets and stuff like that, to have a poker table. There's a buzzer button in our office down here, and it connects upstairs. So we're not really sure if that was like a, hey, cops are here, like pack it up type of button and alerting people upstairs. There might have been a stairway that went up there at some point, so people could run upstairs and hide if the cops are coming in. During renovations, we found bullets in the wall, so I actually have them hanging up on the wall. During Prohibition, there were ways around being able to make alcohol.
They would get near beer that had low alcohol content, and then they would stick a needle through the cork of the bottle and pour in alcohol to make it real beer. Because all of the tourists and the locals, they didn't want near beer. They didn't want soda pop. They wanted real beer that they were used to. And so those places in McHenry, in the McHenry area, kept doing what they did, except they called themselves soda shops or ice cream shops. But there weren't as many, believe it or not, taverns and bars in McHenry in the 19-teens and 20s as there would be today. Most of it was resorter stuff. In McHenry, there was a big brewery, the McHenry Brewery, brewing all kinds of beer for all of the area resorts.
I am Bob Master, and we are at McHenry Brewing Company, located at the corner of Pearl and Green. The McHenry Brewing Company building was built in 1868. Every town kind of had their own brewery, especially like in Europe, and then that town drank whatever beer that brewery provided. So typically it was like one style of beer, and then that was all the town drank. I think people drink because in the 20s or earlier, they didn't have too much to do. There were farmers around the area. They had to relax after a long day of work and farming the fields. They didn't have the modern equipment that we have now, so it took a lot longer to do things, and they only had the time period of dawn to dusk to do things, so that was a good way for them to blow off steam after all hard days' work. People would also drink because it includes the community, and that's how you kind of got your stories from town to town. They would also discuss other topics, politics, religion. The building itself was like an inn, so you could rent a room, I believe. You could come in and get a sandwich or something and fill up your car. But the owner, Gottlieb Boyle, his son named Patsy, was the owner of the building, and he got arrested a few times during Prohibition, but they were never able to find his fermenting tanks that were hidden in the basement of the building.
The basement at McHenry Brewing Company is definitely set up to be more of a little secret kind of brewing spot.
There was a tunnel underneath the road. The city in the 70s, when they redid the Pearl Street Bridge, they lowered the road by 2 feet and discovered the tunnel.
The story is that that's a tunnel that used to go all the way across the street, and they would roll the barrels through there, and across the street was supposed to be a speakeasy. Patrons could go there and drink. And we have some articles that Gottlieb was bringing his beer here. So we speculate that that's where a lot of it was coming from. But as we know, during Prohibition, a lot of people were making their own spirits.
There were stills throughout McHenry County. There's a road called Still Hill Road on the south side of McHenry. There was a place called Payne Hill, which I've never been able to figure out where it is. But Payne Hill, south of McHenry, there was a massive explosion of a beer truck, grain alcohol truck blew up. There was a place south of McHenry, a farm, where Sheriff Lester Edinger had to do something because everybody going past this farm saw the pigs staggering around in the farmyard. They were all drunk on mash that had been dumped. So there's all of this distilling going on, and large amounts of this distilling were going into not only the McHenry area, but down into Chicago, because there was a big raid that happened in Ridgefield, Illinois, when the brewmaster was captured by a vigilante group. And 2 lawyers came out of Chicago to get the brewmaster out of jail. They were Al Capone's personal lawyers. So Capone and his group had Root's fingers into what was going on in the Prohibition business in McHenry County. There's no doubt about that.
There are some stories and some news articles saying that he was in the area.
Capone was well known in McHenry. I interviewed the sheriff one day long ago about Capone coming through McHenry. And Capone would often visit his son in Lake Geneva, who was going to high school there. And Capone would always stop for gas at the corner gas station. And he knew the sheriff. Capone always made sure that he was friends with the local sheriff, that nobody was going to bug him. Capone was, yes, a murderer, but he was a nice guy. You've got to remember that Capone was a Cubs fan. You got to remember that Capone would give away tickets, and he set up a soup kitchen during the Depression. And Capone himself said, "I'm only doing what the public wants."
Looking at the Sanborn maps, which Sanborn maps are old fire insurance maps, which would lay out each individual building and what they were. And the one in 1912 had about 9 saloons in McHenry, the city itself. When Prohibition ends in 1933 and starts, alcohol starts picking up again, we're looking at more about 15 saloons.
What would happen at this bar, this very bar, there would be men coming in to order, and there would be something very, very different about this area in the 1920s. Women would come in. Not only that, but something really important happened because of all these women sitting here at this very bar. They wanted to vote. So not only did Prohibition come to an end, but women are getting the right to vote.
It was all men in here. So we do have some articles that state that women were not allowed in this bar before Prohibition, which is interesting, and I'm glad that changed. During Prohibition, Heimer brothers were the family that owned the bar. So after Prohibition, they still owned it up until about the 50s. And then a third family came in. They took over and still ran it as a bar, so it's always been that bar. And then the fourth family is who we bought it from.
Then after Prohibition, it operated as a brewery again till 1943. But then it was a couple of restaurants, various restaurants. One of the more popular one was the Whale's Tail. I think they were open for about 30 years. It was a couple other restaurants, and then there was Polish Buffet, and then it reopened as Chain of Lakes Brewing Company, I believe around 2013 or 2014. And then I took over in 2018, changed the name to Original McHenry Brewing Company.
We took over in 2020 and decided to bring back the Prohibition part of this bar with Prohibition Era cocktails and really live with the history that is naturally here in this building.
Almost everyone was glad to see that Prohibition was going to come to an end.
For the future, I hope to just keep spreading the history and the stories that live here, being able to keep that alive and not let that go.